I taught men to be careful with things that kill you, and I was not careful with her. That is the whole confession. Everything after it is just detail, and I have had 41 years to arrange the detail, and it has never once made the first sentence any smaller. Sarn Ferry was a vehicle park and a fuel point and a scoring board, and if you want to understand what happened, you have to understand the board first. It hung in the maintenance bay on a sheet of plywood, and it had our names down the left side and 4 columns across the top. Devices found, devices reduced, miles certified, days without a strike. A man named Halbrook had painted it, and Halbrook had died the previous spring in a culvert 11 miles up Route Marrow, and nobody had ever taken the board down, because to take it down would have been to say his last thought had been about a number, and none of us wanted to say that out loud. So the board stayed, and we fed it. Devices reduced was the column that mattered. That was the one the officers photographed. You found a thing in the road, and you put a charge on it, and you backed everybody off 600 meters and you blew it, and the sound came back off the ridge like a door slamming in the sky, and somebody wrote a number in chalk. There is a particular pleasure in it that I am not going to lie about. You spend your whole professional life afraid of a thing, and then you make it stop existing, and the ground jumps, and for about 9 seconds you are the largest object in the valley. What the board did not have a column for was the road the enemy laid the next night in the crater you made. I was 34 that year, and I was the senior technician in a route clearance platoon that had 11 men and 4 vehicles and a reputation. Chief Warrant Officer Lau Bracken. I had been doing the work for 11 years by then, which in that trade is a long time, and the way you get to be a long-timer is that you learn a set of rules and you never break them, and the rules mostly amount to this. Stand off, put steel and distance between you and the thing, and reduce it from as far away as you can manage. They are good rules. I want to be clear about that because of what comes later. They are good rules, and they have saved more men than I can count, and I taught them the way a priest teaches a catechism. But a rule is a wall, and a wall keeps out more than the thing you built it against. The lieutenant that year was named Priestley, and he was 26, and he had a way of standing with his hands behind his back that he had learned from somebody worth learning it from, and it did not fit him yet. He had come to us in the winter, and he had been badly frightened once, in a wadi below the ferry, and he had covered the fright with a kind of loud efficiency that fooled almost everyone. It did not fool the sergeants. Waddle and Gorse, those were their names, and they were the 2 hardest men in the platoon and had been friends since a training company neither of them talked about. Waddle and Gorse looked at Priestley the way you look at weather. You do not argue with weather. You dress for it and you go on with your day, and you keep an eye on the sky. And it did not fool me. But I did not say anything, because I was 34 and I was tired, and I had a rule about lieutenants, which was that they leave in 11 months and the road does not. That is the second thing I have carried. Not what I said. What I decided was not worth saying. In August, they sent us a technician. We had asked for one. We were short. Halbrook's slot had never been filled, and a route clearance platoon without a second qualified render-safe man is a platoon that can only do half the job, and the half we could do was the loud half. The request had gone up in April. It had been answered in August, which is about the usual speed of the world. She came in on the ferry with her kit in a single hard case and a rucksack, and she got off the ramp and stood in the vehicle park in the flat white heat and waited to be told where to put her things. I was up on the deck of the lead vehicle with a wrench in my hand, and I looked down at her the way you look at any new arrival, which is to say, I was doing arithmetic. How long will it take to make this person useful? How much of my time is this going to cost? She was not large. I want to be honest and not build her afterward into something she wasn't. She was ordinary height, and she was built like somebody who carries weight for a living, which is to say thick through the shoulders and forearms and nowhere else. Her hair was cut short, and it was flattened on one side from the helmet. She had a scar on the back of her left hand. a long white one that ran from the base of the thumb up under the cuff. And I saw it, and I did not think about what makes a scar like that on a hand. I should have. That is a scar you get from a wire. Her name was Ray's. That is what the manifest said, and that is what I called her for the 11 days I knew her before I stopped being able to say her name at all. Priestley came out to meet her, and he did the hands behind the back thing, and he said, "You're the EOD tech." "Yes, sir." "Where were you before this?" And she said the name of a place, just the name. It was not a famous name. It was a river ferry 300 miles east, and nothing in the world had ever happened there that made the papers, and Priestley nodded like a man who has confirmed something and said, "All right, Chief Bracken will get you a bunk." Then he walked away, and that was the whole of it, and that is the moment, right there. If you want to find the exact place where 11 men were nearly killed, it is not in a culvert on Route Marrow. It is in a vehicle park at Sarn Ferry at about 10 in the morning when a lieutenant asked one question and did not ask the second one. Because the second one was, "What did you do there?" Her file was in the orderly tent in a green folder in a metal box, and it had been there for 4 days before she arrived, and no one had opened it. I want to explain why, and the explanation is not a good one, but it is true. We did not open it because we already knew what it said. That is the honest reason. We had built a picture of her out of nothing, out of the fact that the slot had been empty a long time, and the replacement had come late, out of the fact that she was quiet, out of the size of her hands, out of 100 small things that were not evidence of anything at all. And once you have built the picture, the file is just paperwork that confirms it, and nobody reads paperwork in August. Certainty is a kind of blindness that feels like eyesight. Nobody has ever told a young man that in a way he can hear. The first road we took her on was a nothing road, a farm track east of the ferry that we ran once a week because a company of engineers used it and somebody had to say it was safe. 4 miles, flat, sightlines you could shave by. Waddle put her in the second vehicle and told her to watch and learn, and she said, "Yes, Sergeant," and got in. And that was the last thing she said for 2 hours. I ran the road from the lead truck. We found nothing because there was nothing, and at the turnaround I climbed down to stretch and she was already out, standing at the edge of the track about 40 meters back the way we had come, looking down at the ground. I walked back to her, not because I was interested, because I was the senior man and a new tech standing alone at the edge of a road is a thing you check. Something. She did not look up. Somebody dug here. I looked. It was a patch of shoulder about the size of a dinner table, and it was the same tan color as everything else in the valley, and there was not one single thing about it that said dug. Went. 2 months, maybe 3. She crouched. She did not touch it. She pointed with her chin at the gravel. "The stones are the wrong way up." I got down beside her and put my face close to the ground the way I had not done in about 4 years. Because you stop doing it. You stop getting down in the dirt when you have a truck with a camera arm on it. And it took me maybe 40 seconds. She was right. The gravel had been turned. The undersides of the small stones, the sides that sit in the earth and stay damp and grow a faint gray bloom on them, were up, catching the light. Not everywhere. In a rough oval. And the oval had been rained on since and driven over, and it had faded back almost to nothing. And in another month it would be gone entirely and the road would look the way roads look. "There's nothing in it now," she said. "They lifted it. But somebody stood here long enough to dig, which means they could stand here, which means they'll stand here again." She stood up and brushed her hands on her thighs. "I put that in the log," she said. And I said, and I remember the exact tone I used, and it was not unkind. It was worse than unkind, it was gentle. I said, "Log what? A hole with nothing in it." She looked at me for a second. "Yes," she said. And I laughed, not meanly. That is what I want you to understand, and it is what I cannot forgive. I laughed the way you laugh at a child who has done a sum in a novel way and arrived at the right answer by accident, and I clapped her once on the shoulder and I said, "Come on. Board doesn't have a column for holes." She got in the truck. I have thought about that 4-mile road more than I have thought about most of the rest of my life. She had been in the country 11 hours. She had walked 40 meters from a stopped vehicle and found the place where an enemy had knelt in the dark 3 months earlier, and she had told me, and I had told her the board did not have a column for it. The board, I told her about the board. 9 days later, she found the third road. By then she had been out with us 6 times, and a pattern had established itself that I did not examine at the time, because patterns that flatter you never get examined. The pattern was this. She found things and we blew them and the board went up and nobody wrote her name on it. Not out of malice, out of procedure. The board recorded devices reduced, and the man who put the charge on and pulled back and hit the shot, that was the man who reduced it. That was Waddle, mostly, or Gorse. She was the one who walked the shoulder and stopped and said there, and stood back while the professionals went to work. She never asked for the charge. She asked to look twice, and both times Priestley said no, and both times she said, "Yes, sir," and stood back. I told myself she was being trained. That is what I told myself, and it is a thing that senior men tell themselves constantly, and it is nearly always a lie. She was not being trained. She was being used, her eyes were being used. The thing in her that could read a road was being used, and the men using it were writing their own names in chalk. On the 6th day out, Gorse said something in the mess tent. It was not aimed at her. It was aimed at the ceiling, the way men aim things when they want to be heard without having said anything. He said, "It's a nice thing having a bird dog." And there was a laugh, not a big one, a low one, the kind that runs along a table and dies at the end of it. She was 4 seats down. She was eating. She did not stop eating, and she did not look up, and her face did not change by one line. I looked at her and I thought, and this is the thought, this is the exact shape of the thing I thought, and I have never told anyone this. I thought, she's taking it well. She's taking it well. As though the fact that she did not flinch made the throw all right. As though her composure were a floor we were entitled to keep dropping things onto. I said nothing. The third road was Route Marrow, and it was not a nothing road. Marrow ran 9 miles from Sarn Ferry up through a set of low draws to a ridge position called Kettle, where a rifle company sat in stone sangars watching a border they could not have described the purpose of. Marrow was the only ground link to Kettle. Everything that went up Marrow, and everything that came down, the wounded, the dead, the men rotating out, came down Marrow, and there was no other route, and everybody on both sides of that valley knew it. It had 11 culverts. I knew them by number. Halbrook had died at number 6. The plan on the 11th of August was ordinary. A relief column was going up to Kettle, 41 men in 6 vehicles, a section of infantry rotating in, water, ammunition, a mail bag. We would clear ahead of them, certify the road, and Kettle would send its casualties and its outgoing section down behind us in the afternoon. One road, up and back, and by dark everyone would be somewhere with a roof. We started at 4 in the morning, which is the right time, and by 9 we had done 6 miles and found 2 things and blown them both, and Priestley was in a good mood, and the day had that terrible clean feeling that days have right before they go wrong. At mile 7, the road went into a set of switchbacks under a shale shoulder, and Ray stopped the second vehicle and got out. I saw her in my mirror. She walked forward maybe 30 meters, and then she went off the road entirely, up onto the shale, and she stood up there for a long time with her back to us, looking not at the road but at the ground above the road, and then she came down and walked all the way up to my truck and stood at my window. "Chief," she said, "I don't want to certify this." I had my hand on the door, and the engine was running, and Priestley's voice was in my ear on the net asking why we had stopped. "Talk," I said. "The switchbacks are wrong," she said. There's a spoil pile up on the shelf. Someone moved a lot of dirt off this road and carried it uphill instead of dumping it downslope, which is what you do if you don't want it seen from below. It's old. Weeks. But they carried it, which means they were here a long time, which means they weren't in a hurry, which means it isn't one device, it's a set. We swept the switchbacks. We swept the surface. She was not arguing. That is the thing that I could not process at the time and that I understand perfectly now. She was not arguing with me. She was reporting to me in the flat, unhurried voice of someone who has done a thing correctly and is telling you what she found. And my entire body was reacting to it as though it were insubordination. The detector reads the top 18 inches. If they built deep and let 3 weeks of traffic pack the road down over it, we drive over it and it reads clean, and it is clean, right up until something heavy enough comes along. Something heavy enough. Like 6 vehicles in a column, one behind the other on the same wheel line. She looked at me. The road's already been driven today, by us, twice. That's how they'd want it. Priestley came up on foot. He had heard the last of it, and he had that look he got, the one that was fright wearing a uniform. You want to stop a relief column, he said, on a spoil pile. I want 4 hours, she said. I want to take the switchbacks by hand. Not the arm, not the detector, by hand on my knees, and I'll tell you what's under them. By hand. Yes, sir. And Priestley turned to me. He actually turned to me. And that is my moment, that is the one, that is the 2 seconds that I will be standing in when I die, and I want you to see it exactly as it was, because there was no drama in it at all. He said, Chief. And I said, the road reads clean, sir. That's it, that's all I said. 6 words in a flat professional voice, standing in the sun with my hand on a door. I did not say she's wrong. I did not say she's inexperienced. I said a true thing. The road did read clean. The detector had swept it and it had read clean. That was a fact and it was on the log. And I let the true thing do the work that a lie would have had to do. That is the most cowardly sentence I have ever spoken, and it was factually correct in every particular. Priestley nodded. He had what he needed. He said, we're not holding 41 men on a shale shelf for 4 hours while you crawl. Certify the road. And she said, no, sir. The valley did not go quiet. That is a thing they put in stories. The valley did not go quiet. The engines were running, and somebody's radio was squawking, and up on the shoulder a bird was making that flat clicking noise they made all summer. But something went quiet in Priestley. I saw it go. Say again. I won't sign it, sir. I'll do the hand clear and then I'll sign it. I won't sign it now. That's a refusal of an order. It's a refusal to certify, sir. Still flat. Still that same voice, and I remember thinking, with a kind of horror I did not have a name for, she doesn't understand what's happening to her. And she understood it perfectly. She had simply decided, somewhere long before that morning, in some room I will never see, what she was and was not going to do, and had stopped renegotiating it. Certification is a technical signature. It's mine. You can order me up the road, sir, and I'll go, but you can't order my name onto a document that says I checked something I didn't check. Waddle and Gorse had come up by then. Everybody had come up. That is how these things happen, not in private, never in private, always with an audience of men who will each individually tell themselves afterward that they were only watching. Priestley stood there for about 4 seconds. And then he said the thing. And I have to write it down exactly, because I have spent 41 years making sure I did not soften it in my own head. He said, fine, Sergeant Waddle, she wants to stay with the road, leave her with the road. There was a wire picket at the edge of the shoulder. An old one. The shale shelf had been fenced once, God knows why, and there were 3 pickets left standing in a row like bad teeth, and the wire between them was down and rusted and coiled in the dirt. Waddle looked at Priestley for a second longer than a sergeant should have to. Then he took the zip ties off his vest. I want to tell you that I stepped forward. I want to tell you there is a version of this where I put my hand on Waddle's arm. I stood by the door of my truck with the engine running. She did not fight. She did not say one word. She put her hands out in front of her, wrists together without being told, the way you do when you have decided that the fastest way through a stupid thing is through it. And Waddle tied her wrists and then ran a second tie from the ties to the picket and pulled it down snug, and did not look at her face while he did it. And Priestley said loudly for the platoon, "The range can log a real casualty for once." And there was a laugh. Not from everybody. I have been careful about this in my memory. I have been very careful. I have gone through the faces one at a time. Not from everybody, but from enough. And I did not laugh, and that is not a defense. That is just the last small clean thing I have to hold, and it is not worth anything. We got in the trucks. We drove up the switchbacks, all 6 vehicles of the relief column and our 10 vehicles nose to tail over a spoil pile that a 28-year-old technician had told us was a spoil pile. And nothing happened. And I looked in my mirror as we came around the top bend, and I saw her standing at the picket in the white heat with her wrists at her waist, and she was not looking at us. She was looking at the road. She was already working. Nothing happened on the switchbacks because they were never for us. I understood that at about 4 in the afternoon, sitting on the wall of a stone sanger at Kettle with a cup of tea going cold in my hand, and the understanding came all at once, the way they do, and it went through me like cold water down a collar. They were not for us going up. 10 vehicles going up in the morning, spread out, moving fast, with a clearance element in front and nothing worth killing in the back. That is a poor target. That is a target you spend a month's work on and get 4 dead and a burned truck. They were for us coming down. Coming down, we would be a casualty convoy. Coming down, we would be slow because you go slow with wounded. Coming down, we would be nose to tail in the same wheel ruts we had just packed for them with 10 vehicles of our own weight. Coming down, we would be 41 men plus whatever Kettle gave us, on one road with no alternate at the end of a long day, in the failing light, thinking about food. And coming down, we would not sweep. That was the part that made me put the tea down and stand up. We would not sweep, because we had already certified it, because the log said clean, because the whole logic of route clearance is that you clear a road forward and then the road is clear, and you do not clear it twice in one day, and everybody in that valley, everybody on both sides of that valley, knew it. She had said it to me at the window. The road's already been driven today, by us, twice. That's how they'd want it. And I had said, the road reads clean, sir. Kettle gave us its casualties at 5. 2 of them from a mortar the week before, both stable, both stretcher cases, and a 3rd man with a hand injury who could sit up. It gave us its outgoing section. 11 men who had been on that ridge for 4 months and who came down off the sangers with their faces already somewhere else, already home, already in a kitchen in a town none of the rest of us had ever seen. 11 men. That is where the number comes from, and I want you to hold it because it comes back. We formed the column in the last of the light. 6 vehicles, 41 souls counting the wounded, and Priestley walked the line with his hands behind his back and told the drivers to keep it tight because we would be running the last of it in the dark. And the drivers said yes, sir, and closed up nose to tail exactly as they had been told, exactly as the men on the shale shelf had spent 3 weeks of nights hopping we would. I stood at the door of my truck, and I did not get in. Waddle came up beside me. He had a cigarette he was not smoking, just holding, turning it over. He said, "She'll have got out of those ties." I said, "I know. Cut them on the picket. Wire burr take her an hour." "I know." He turned the cigarette over. "She'll be walking down," he said. And there it was, laid out flat between 2 men who had both known it for 6 hours and had not said it, because to say it was to say the rest. She would be walking down, alone. 9 miles of a road she had been told to certify and had refused to certify. In the dark, with no vehicle, no radio, no light, no support, and no reason on this earth to do anything at all except sit down on the shoulder and wait to be picked up by somebody who was not us. And she would be working, because that is what she had been doing when I looked in the mirror. She had been standing tied to a fence post with her wrists in front of her, and she had not been looking at the trucks that were leaving her. She had been looking at the ground. I got on the net, and I asked Priestley to hold the column. He said no. I asked again. I said the word deep, and I said the words packed line, and I said once with the whole platoon listening on an open net, "Sir, I certified that road and I was wrong." And he said, and he was frightened, I know that now, he was 26 and he had done a thing at midday that he could not walk back, and the only way left to him was forward. He said, "Chief, we are not spending the night on this ridge because a specialist had a feeling about gravel. Move." I moved. I put my truck at the head of the column, and I took 41 men down Route Marrow in the dark on a road I had certified. And I want to say that I did it because I had no choice. And I have had 41 years to find the place where the choice was, and I can tell you exactly where it is. It is at a window in the sun at mile 7, and it is 6 words long. Here is what she did. I did not see it. I have to be honest about that too. I did not see 1 minute of it, and everything I am about to tell you I got afterward, in pieces, from the road itself, from the 11 initiators on a poncho, from a written statement 4 pages long that she gave to a board of inquiry in a voice they later described as unhelpfully unemotional, and from one conversation on a flight line that lasted less than 90 seconds. But I have reconstructed it the way you reconstruct a device, which is backward from what it did to what it was, and I am a good technician, and this is what happened. She got out of the ties in about 40 minutes. Waddle was right about the burr. There is a place on an old wire picket where the strand has been cut and the cut end curls, and it is not sharp enough to cut a man's ties quickly, but it is sharp enough to cut them eventually, and eventually was all she had. Then she stood on the shale shelf in the late afternoon, and she did not walk down. She walked up. She went up the shoulder, up the shale, 300 meters up above the switchbacks, and she sat down. And she stayed there for something close to 2 hours, in the heat, with no water, and she looked at Route Marrow. I know she did this because there is a place up there where the shale is scuffed in a sitting shape, and there is a pressed line in the scree where a forearm rested. And because a man from the inquiry team asked her, months later, why she had done it, and her answer is in the transcript, and it is 1 sentence long. She said, "I needed to see the road the way they saw it. Not the way we saw it. Not from a truck, not through a screen, not from the driver's seat at 15 miles an hour with a camera arm out in front. From the hill. From where a man sits for 3 weeks with nothing to do but watch a road and learn its habits and choose, out of 9 miles of ground, the 11 places where a thing that is slow and heavy and full of tired men will put its wheels. She sat up there and she learned the road from above, and then the sun went down and she came off the shale and she started walking. 9 miles, downhill mostly, in the dark with no light because a light on that road would have killed her. And she did the work by hand. I want to explain what that means, because people hear by hand and they think of bravery, and bravery has almost nothing to do with it. Bravery is what you need when you have run out of method. She did not run out of method for 9 miles. By hand means this. You do not walk down the middle of the road, because the middle of the road is where the wheels go, and the wheels are the whole point. You walk the shoulder, off the wheel line, and you go slow, and you keep your eyes about 4 feet in front of your boots, and you read. You read the gravel. Stones that have been turned sit differently, the pale weathered face down, the damp gray face up, and even after weeks, even after rain, even after traffic, the pattern of turning is wrong in a way the eye can be taught to catch. Fresh disturbance is loud. Old disturbance is quiet. Old disturbance that somebody has worked hard to make quiet is the quietest thing on the road, and it is quiet in a specific way. And that specific way is what she had spent 2 hours on a hill learning to see. You read the where. A road that carries traffic develops two polished ruts, and where somebody has dug and refilled, the fill packs at a different rate than the road around it. And after 3 weeks of traffic, there is a dip you cannot see in daylight from a truck and can absolutely feel with the flat of your hand at night on your knees. You read the spacing. And this is the part that I did not understand until I was standing on that road at dawn looking down at what she had laid out on a poncho. And it is the part that still, 41 years later, stops me in the middle of doing ordinary things. They were spaced for a column, not scattered, spaced. 11 of them across 4 miles, and the gaps between them were not random and were not even. They were the length of a vehicle plus an interval, over and over. The exact geometry of 6 trucks nose to tail moving slow with wounded aboard, so that when the first one went, the vehicle behind it would be sitting on the second one, and the vehicle behind that would be sitting on the third. They had not built a minefield. They had built a comb, and she had seen the teeth of it from a hill. She found the first one at about 9 at night, a mile and a half below the switchbacks, and she went down on her knees in the dark on the shoulder of Route Marrow and put her hands into the road. And then she did the thing that I still cannot fully explain to men who did not do that job. She did not blow it. She had no charge, that is true. She had no demolition stores. She had nothing on her but the small kit she wore on her belt and had been left tied to a fence with, a probe, a pair of snips, a light she did not use, and about 11 inches of hooked steel. But she also had, 4 miles below her, a road she could have walked away from. She could have gone down the shoulder and reached the ferry by midnight and told them the road was a comb and let somebody else deal with it in the morning with a truck and a robot arm and 600 meters of standoff and every rule I had ever taught. Except that the column was already coming down. She knew that. Of course she knew that. She had been on that ridge. She knew the rotation. She knew Kettle was giving up its casualties that day, and she knew we would be nose to tail, and she knew we would be running in the dark, and she knew, this is the one that takes the wind out of me. This is the one I have to sit down for. She knew that the men in those trucks were the men who had tied her to a post. And she got down on her knees in the road and started taking them apart with her hands. There are 2 ways to make a thing in a road stop being dangerous. You can destroy it, which is loud and safe for you and takes a charge and standoff in time. Or you can render it safe, which means you go to it, and you find the initiator, the small, stupid, clever thing that decides when the big thing happens, and you separate it from the main charge, by hand, close enough that if you are wrong there is no distance and no steel and no second chance and no body to bury. We did the first one. That is what the board measured, devices reduced. She did the second one 11 times in a night, on a road in the dark, because the first one would have taken 40 minutes each and made a crater and a noise. And 40 minutes times 11 is more time than she had. And a noise on that road would have brought men down off the hill she had just been sitting on. And a crater is a hole, and a hole is where they put the next one. And because, and this is in her statement, this is her own sentence, 4 pages of the flattest prose I have ever read, and then this. The column was inside the blast radius from 2130 onward. Reduction in place was not available after that time. Inside the blast radius. That was us. Coming down the road toward her at 15 miles an hour with our headlights making 2 long tunnels in the dust, and every crater she might have made would have been a crater she made under somebody's truck. So she knelt in front of 11 of them and took them apart with a probe and a pair of snips and 11 inches of hooked steel. And she did it one at a time. And between each one she stood up and walked down the shoulder toward the column that was coming toward her, and did it again. They found her marks afterward. That is how the inquiry reconstructed the sequence. She had marked each cleared position, not with anything a truck could see, but with a small cairn of 3 stones set off the shoulder at the edge of the scrub. 3 stones, left-hand side, 11 times. She did not know if anyone would ever read them. She built them anyway, because that is what you do, because the next man on that road needs to know where you have already been, and the next man on that road is a category of person she took seriously even while sitting tied to a fence post. I have taught that story to men for 30 years, and I have never once got through the 3 stones without stopping. The 4th one was under the road, not in the shoulder. Deep. A pipe cut into the fill, and the fill packed by 3 weeks of traffic, exactly as she had said at my window in the sun, and the pressure plate was set with a spacing on the plunger that meant nothing under 3 tons would set it off. Nothing under 3 tons. A man walking on it would not set it off. A goat would not set it off. A truck would. She lay down in the road. This is in the reconstruction. They found the impression. She lay flat on her stomach in the wheel rut in the dark with her arms extended into the fill. And she worked on it for a period they estimated at 55 minutes, with the column somewhere above her in the switchbacks, coming down. 55 minutes lying in a road you know is going to have a truck on it. The 7th one was at Culvert 6, where Halbrook died, where the road narrowed and dropped and crossed the draw on a concrete throat 40 years old, and where I had, personally, 3 separate times, stopped a column and swept and found nothing and driven on with the feeling you get at a grave. She cleared Culvert 6 at about 2 in the morning, and by then we were 4 miles above her, and I was sitting in the lead truck with my jaw so tight the muscle was jumping, watching a road that read clean, and I had my hand on the net switch about 4 times and I did not press it. She had been working for 5 hours by then. She was 28, and she had had no water since the morning and no food since the night before, and she had been tied to a post in the sun for 40 minutes, and she had walked up a shale slope and sat in the heat for 2 hours, and then walked 6 miles and rendered safe 7 devices with her hands. And she had 4 to go, and they were the 4 closest to us. They met us at Culvert 3. That is what the record says. Contact between the clearance element and technician rays occurred at approximately 2:47 hours vicinity Culvert 3. And contact is a good word, a clean word, and it is the word for what happened, and it is a lie in every way that matters. Here is what happened. I was in the lead truck with the headlights on low and the road unrolling in front of us gray and empty, and my driver, a boy named Ives, 19, a good driver who is alive today and has grandchildren, said, "Chief." And there was somebody standing in the road. Not on the shoulder, in the road, dead center in the wheel line in the middle of Route Marrow at 3 in the morning with her arms up. Ives braked. Everybody braked. 6 vehicles nose to tail on a downhill grade in the dark, and the whole column concertinaed and stopped, and I came out of that truck before it had finished rocking. She was covered in the road. That is the only way to say it. Her hands and forearms were gray to the elbow with filled dust, and there was blood on the back of the left one where the old scar was, fresh over old, and her uniform was gray down the whole front of her from lying in the wheel rut, and her face had white tracks on it where sweat had run through the dust and dried. And she was perfectly steady. That is the thing I cannot get past. She had been on her knees in the dark for 6 hours with her hands inside 11 objects designed by clever men to kill her, and she stood in the middle of that road with a column of trucks 15 feet from her, and her voice did not have one single tremor in it. She said, "Stop the vehicles, Chief." They were already stopped. She said, "There are 4 more, 2 in front of you, 2 behind where you'll turn. Nobody moves until I say." And Priestley came up the line at a run. I heard him coming. I heard him shouting before I could see him, shouting her name, shouting, "What are you doing on this road?" shouting the word arrest, and he came into the headlights with his hand out and his face white. And she turned to him. She did not raise her voice. She never raised her voice, not once, not in the whole 11 days, and I have come to understand that this was not gentleness. This was a decision, made a long time ago, by someone who had worked out that the only thing she could not afford to lose was the thing that would go first if she let go of it. She said, "Sir, you have 31 meters of road in front of your lead vehicle, and there is a plate in it. If you order that truck to move, it will move onto the plate. I am asking you to stand still." And Priestley opened his mouth. And Sergeant Waddle, who had tied her wrists to a picket that morning with his own 2 hands and had not been able to look at her while he did it, said, out of the dark, in a voice I had never heard him use, "Sir, stand still." Nobody moved. For 4 hours nobody moved. She cleared the last 4 in front of the headlights of 6 trucks, with 41 men standing in the road behind her in the dark, watching, and nobody said one word. I have been in a lot of quiet places. That was the quietest 4 hours of my life. You could hear her breathing. That is not a figure of speech. The valley was still, and the engines were off, and 41 men were holding their breath in shifts, and you could hear her breathing while she worked, slow and even in through the nose, the way you are taught and the way almost nobody actually does when their hands are in the thing. At one point, about the 3rd hour, she stood up from the second one and she swayed. Just once. Her knees went soft for maybe half a second and she put a hand out and touched the road. And 41 men moved forward 1 step, all together, without a word, like a thing pulled on a string. And she put her hand up, not looking at us, just the hand flat stay. And 41 men stopped. I have never in my life seen an order obeyed like that. Not before, not since. Not in 11 years of that work and not in the 20 I did after it. There was no rank in it. There was no authority in it in any way the manuals would recognize. There was a woman on her knees in a road, holding 1 flat hand up in the dark, and there was not a man in that valley who would have taken another step. She finished the last one at 6:41, and it was getting light, and she stood up, and she walked to the shoulder, and she laid the last initiator down on the poncho with the other 10. 11 of them, set out in a row in order from the top of the road to the bottom, each one with a small stone beside it that she had carried down from its position so that the sequence could be reconstructed. She had laid them out like a report, because that is what they were. Because the next thing that was going to happen in her mind was that somebody was going to have to write this down properly, and she had spent the last of whatever she had left making sure that whoever it was could do it right. Then she sat down on the shoulder of Root Marrow, and she put her arms on her knees, and she looked at nothing. And that is when Colonel Hearn came up the road. He had come out from the ferry at first light with a section, because a column that goes down Marrow at dusk and is not at the ferry by midnight is a column that has been killed. And he had spent the night making the phone calls you make, and he had come up the road himself to find whatever there was to find. And what he found was 6 trucks stopped nose to tail in the gray light, and 41 men standing in the road with no one telling them to, and a poncho on the shoulder with 11 initiators on it laid out in a row like a row of dead birds, and a woman sitting in the dirt beside them with gray dust to her elbows. He got out of his vehicle. He walked past the trucks. Nobody spoke to him. He walked all the way to the poncho and he stood over it and he looked down at it for a long time. He was a big man, Hearn, and he had been doing it a long time, and he had a face like something left out in the weather. He counted them. I watched him do it. His mouth moved. He counted them the way you count something that you have to be sure about twice, and then he crouched down at the edge of the poncho, and he did not touch anything, and he stayed there. And then he asked, in a voice that did not work properly, "Who cleared this road?" And nobody answered, because Priestley could not speak, and Waddle could not speak, and Gorse was looking at the ground. And I opened my mouth and there was nothing in it, nothing, not one word, not her name, and I have replayed that half-second more times than any other half-second in my life, and I still cannot tell you why the machinery in my throat did not work. And into that silence, a voice from somewhere back in the column, a boy from the outgoing section, one of the 11 from Kettle, A man who had never met her before that night, who had come down off a ridge thinking about his mother's kitchen, and had spent 4 hours standing in a road watching a stranger keep him alive. A voice said, "She did, sir." And the whole column turned and looked at her. She stood up. Of course she stood up. A colonel was present. She stood up in the dust and came to attention, in a uniform gray to the waist, with her hands shaking now, finally, now that it was over, the shake coming up through her arms the way it comes when the thing lets go of you at last, and she pushed them flat against her thighs to still them. And Hearn said, "Name and unit." And she gave it. And he said, "That's not what I asked. What's your call sign?" And there was a pause. And she said, "Coldwater, sir." I want to tell you what happened to Colonel Hearn's face, and I do not have the words for it, and I have had 4 decades to find them. He put a hand on the hood of the nearest truck. He needed it. This is a man who had held a border for 2 years and had buried more men than I had ever commanded, and he put his hand flat on the hood of a truck because his legs had gone. He said, and it was not to her, it was to us, to all of us, in a voice that was coming apart. Coldwater is the technician who took the Marrow bridge chain apart, under fire, for 9 hours. That's the highest render-safe count in this theater, and it is not close. Nobody made a sound. "They sent her here," he said, "because I asked for the best technician on the roster in April, and I have been asking every month since." And he turned and looked at the column, at 6 trucks, at 41 men, at Priestley standing in the headlights with his hands at his sides. And he said, very quietly, "What was she doing on foot?" And the sun came up over the ridge onto Route Marrow, and 41 men stood in the road, and nobody said anything at all. Priestley told him, to his enormous permanent credit, and it is the only credit I can give him, and I give it fully, Priestley told him the truth, standing in the road with the whole platoon listening, in about 9 sentences, and he did not soften one of them. He said I ordered her tied to a picket. He said I said the range could log a real casualty. He said the men laughed. He did not say Chief Bracken certified the road, because he was a better man in that 1 minute than he had been in his whole life up to it, and he took it all. And I stood there and let him. That is the last piece. That is the thing at the bottom of the box. I let a frightened 26-year-old take the whole weight of a decision that I had made with 6 words at a truck window, and I stood in the dirt with the sun coming up, and I said nothing. And Colonel Hearn looked at me once, for about a second and a half, and he knew. He had been a warrant officer himself once, and he knew exactly what a senior technician's silence at a lieutenant's elbow is worth, and he never spoke to me again in his life. Hearn went down on one knee. He did not do it to her. I want to be precise, because the story has been told wrong to me by men who were not there. He did not kneel to her, and she would have hated that, and I think he knew it. He went down on one knee at the edge of the poncho, in front of the 11, and he put his forearm across his thigh, and he bowed his head. And he stayed like that for a long moment in the dust. And then he did what he had come to do, which was to be a colonel. He stood up and he gave orders. He got the wounded off that road. He put a guard on the poncho. He called for the ferry, and he sent a section up onto the shale shoulder above the switchbacks, and they found the sitting place and the sight lines and everything else, and the picture that came out of it was exactly the picture she had drawn at my window at 9 o'clock the previous morning in about 40 seconds. And she went back down the road in the back of his vehicle with her hands still shaking, and a canteen somebody had put in them, and she did not look at us as she went past. She did not look at us. I have wanted, for 41 years, to be able to tell you that she looked at us. I saw her once more. It was 11 days later on the flight line at the ferry, and she was going out on a rotary wing to somewhere they needed her more, and I had known she was going, and I had waited by the fuel bowser for 2 hours to make sure I would be there when she came out. She came across the pan with her hard case and her ruck. I stepped out in front of her, and she stopped, And she put the case down, and she waited in that flat, patient way for whatever was going to be said to her. And here is what I had. 2 hours by a fuel Bowser and 11 days, and a whole professional life of knowing exactly what to say to a man on a road. And here is what I had. I'm sorry. And she looked at me. And she was tired. She had that thing in the eyes that we all had by then, and there was nothing in her face at all. No anger, no contempt, and God help me, no forgiveness either. Just attention. And she said, "The road's clear, Chief." That's it, that is what she said. "The road's clear, Chief." And she picked up her case and she walked to the aircraft and she got on it and it went. I did not salute her. I stood on a flight line with my hands at my sides and I watched a helicopter get small, and I did not salute her, and I have never been able to fully explain why. Whether it was because I did not think I had the right, or because I was afraid of what the men would think, or because a salute was too small and I knew it, or because I was, at the bottom of it, still and finally a coward. I think it was the last one. I have had a long time to think about it, and I think it was the last one. I did 20 more years in that trade after Marrow, and I did it differently. I took the board down. That was the first thing. I went into the maintenance bay at Sarn Ferry with a claw hammer 3 days after, and I pulled the plywood off the wall and I broke it up and I burned it, and Gorse helped me, and neither of us said one word the entire time. And after that I taught mostly. And every course I ever ran, from the first one to the last one, opened the same way, and the men used to talk about it. I know they did, the old chief and his one story. I would stand at the front of the room and I would say, "There is a column on the board for the things you destroy. There is no column for the things you find and are not believed about. Learn to read the second column, because that is where the men die." And then I would tell them about a woman on her knees in a road at night, taking 11 things apart with her hands to save 41 men who had tied her to a fence post that morning. And I would tell them that she never mentioned it. Not once. Not in her statement, not to the inquiry, not to a single soul I have ever been able to find in 41 years. Not once. She never said "I told you." She had the right to. She had earned that right in a way that almost nobody in the history of the world has ever earned it, and she had it in her hand, and she put it down and walked away and never picked it up again. That is the thing I could not understand at 34 and understand completely now, at 75, sitting on a porch a long way from any of it. She did not need us to know. She needed the road to be clear. Priestley left the service that winter. I heard he did well later in another life, and I hope that's true. I have no appetite left for wanting him punished. Waddle stayed 22 years and never made a mistake again that I ever heard of. Ives, the boy driving my truck, is alive and has grandchildren, and one of them is a girl of about 9, and I have thought about that. 41 of us came down Marrow, every one of us, not one man scratched. And every single one of those 41 men is somebody's father or grandfather or nothing at all by now. And not one of them, in all the years, has ever managed to say the thing properly. And I have decided that I am not going to be the last one to fail at it. So, I never learned her first name. That is a strange, small, terrible thing to say, but I never did. She was raised on a manifest in cold water on a net. And by the time I thought to ask, there was no one left to ask. But there is a road 9 miles long, in a country I will never see again, and if there is any justice at all in the arrangement of the world, then somewhere on the left-hand shoulder of it, out in the scrub, under 41 years of dust, there are still 11 small cairns of 3 stones each. She built them for whoever came next. I am whoever came next. So this is me, standing up off a porch chair at 75 years old with a bad hip and a hand that shakes worse than hers did that morning, in an empty yard with nobody watching. This is the salute I owed her on a flight line in August, 41 years late. "Ma'am, the road's clear."